So you are one of the few facilitators who I know who calls out and distinguishes the activity of power in operation on a regular basis with just absolute fearlessness, but absolute rigor. I'm here in the games, the conscious intimacy games, doing this so that there will be group compliance. And that was the first thing I ever deeply appreciated you at the games. I was like, oh my gosh, that it's true, but who would say that? And now everyone has choice. Now everyone has spaciousness. So, to my listeners, I have the great privilege, pleasure, and honor of introducing Ricky Goodall, former MMA fighter, massively epic and skilled coach and facilitator. Welcome, sir. I love your approach to power. That's what I had to say.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you. I'm glad to be here.
So, what has you do what you do in relation to power? Like calling it out, distinguishing it, supporting people and having more choice around it? Like what's the angle? Because I'll give you an example. One of my friends, who was one of my former clients, came to the event last night, and he said at the end, he was like, "That guy," and he pointed to you. He's like, that guy's like the real deal. I really enjoyed this. Most events like this I come to, and I feel like they're just trying to sell me something. And you made calls to action. You definitely shared about offers and opportunities, but he did not feel as if A, the value of the event was just a teeing up for trying to make an offer. And he also had this deep, rich experience of like nourishment. And so did I. So like, tell whatever you want to say about that. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, well, I'd love to share a little backstory. So, you and I talked about pickup stuff and Neil Strauss and the game, and when I first started my MMA career, I was 23 years old. I was homeless and jobless. I just went through an intense breakup. I'd been dating a woman for 5 years who had 3 kids. So I was 23 years old and was a stepdad for 5 years. So, or 24 years old, was a stepdad for 5 years. So I went from this very difficult, challenging, toxic, dramatic relationship. I was toxic, she was toxic, and to being single, and then moving from this small town I lived to a city. And my MMA coach, one of my jujitsu coaches, was in his like, I think he was in his 50s at that time. Told me, passed me the book, The Game, and he said, "Read this; it'll change your life." And I read it, and it changed my life because it helped me see that attraction's not a choice in dating dynamics, and that I actually had some ability to encourage attraction. Now, at that time, it was rooted mostly around manipulation and abusing power dynamics. Because again, I went from being homeless and jobless to becoming an MMA fighter, and then eventually a championship contender, competing on pay-per-view television in front of thousands of fans. So I suddenly had this identity. I had this social proof that I was somebody, even though I just made it all up. And so I learned how to use my power dynamic to get girls. And I learned how to manipulate at an incredibly high level using my power dynamic. And then years later, I became a coach and became a facilitator and didn't have strong boundaries around who's a client and who's a girl that I'm dating, and created a lot of suffering for myself and didn't understand the power dynamic. No one taught me about it. I mean, I intuitively knew it, but no one taught me that there needs to be this ethical boundary around who's a client, who's a girlfriend. And I had to suffer through I would say that the most dangerous thing about a power dynamic is the fact that when I create a relationship based on a power dynamic, and I know we weren't talking about that, but specifically, but I'm going to go there. When I create a relationship around a power dynamic, not only am I bringing potential harm to the person, but I'm bringing a lot of potential harm to myself, because the person puts me on this pedestal of who they think I am based on the spell they're under from me leading them through an experience. And then when I fall from that pedestal, it's a long fall to the bottom. And I'm not the person that they think I am. I'm not the person they imagine based on their attachment wounds that are getting triggered. Now I'm speaking about women, but it's the same with men who I don't date men. So let's say a man puts me on this pedestal thinking I'm this incredible facilitator and this amazing, perfect person. It's like, I don't want them to think that, because there's a long drop from that pedestal they put me on. So what I've learned from my mentors is all about like authentic enrollment versus sales. And that's the same with people that I'm dating. It's about enrolling them on a common vision rather than trying to sell them a fantasy. And what a lot of facilitators in my experience do, including myself in the past, is I would sell women on a fantasy long enough to get what I wanted from them, which is usually sex or dating. And then the fantasy dissolved, and what was left is a bitter, resentful person who feels like they got sold on something, rather than somebody who's through consent been enrolled into a shared vision, a shared unified idea of what we're trying to create. So I wanted to share that because maybe I want to confess it a little bit too about my own background of like not about using the power dynamics both in sales and in dating to my advantage and not always doing it in an ethical way. Mostly because I didn't have any mentors or anyone to teach me what ethics was, but also because I didn't really care a lot of those times either. And I had to learn the hard way through suffering and through what I might call karma or cause and effect that taught me what I needed to know.
Mm. I love that because it's the perfect setup. And I'll confess too, I've had past partners who I deployed the context of my success as an entrepreneur or who I am as a coach and then would take on a little bit of the coaching hat. It got better over time successively. Like it started as like, okay, well, I meet you at my event and then there's 90 days. More actually it wasn't even 90 days. I tell that story like it was 90 days, but it wasn't. And that the halo effect was still there. And then the second one, one of our first things we did was I facilitated her through pain on our first date. And so there's a little bit of even if I'm attempting it as a gift, even if I'm like, hey, there's something I know how to do that will help you, still I'm reaching to serve somebody who's suffering. And then the third case was a little better. I mean, there was no perceivable manipulation that I discerned early on, but eventually in the relationship, I saw there were ways that what I knew could help her. And so I said, "Here, try this course." And then, the relationship, I think there was a little bit of looking up to me. There wasn't so much of a fall from grace later on as like to the degree that I subconsciously chose someone who was weak, wounded, traumatized. When she stopped being that, she no longer needed me as a rescuer in terms of the attention and the significance I was giving her. And so then sort of I like to say my little bird flew the coop. Like she didn't need me anymore. And any good hero in relationship, if you're great at actually helping someone to save themselves, well then they're not going to need you. So you're sowing the seeds of your own demise. But underlying that, the patterns that you just shared, is this deep hunger on the part of, I think, modern men in general, is what we can speak to more authentically, but probably to everyone in general, based in your observation, for connection, for intimacy, like reliably delivered, like consistently received. And I resonate so much with your vision, so much with your community, with your events, because I have found them to be personally, for me, really nourishing. I mean, there's still the question of like the social baseline that someone is walking around through life living with, and events can't really resolve that. I mean, they happen once every week or every 2 weeks or, every 2 days or something. And so that there's an amount of responsibility that only someone can take for themselves in feeding themselves the nutrition that they need. But what you do, it's so brilliant and beautiful and powerful. So like, yeah, how can your games serve and support hungry men, or the mission or the community of what you're building support hungry men who are looking for that kind of romantic intimacy? Do you hear what I'm asking?
Yeah, it's funny. Most men, I imagine, come to the games because they think it's something different than it is.
Mm.
They think they're coming for dessert, but they're really coming for the meal. They're really coming for what they actually need, not what they want. There's that marketing phrase, sell them what they want, give them what they need. And so when people hear a conscious intimacy, I imagine they're thinking tantra, they're thinking play parties, or they're thinking sex parties, or whatever they're thinking, even though we're very clear that it's not those things. We're in this interesting place in our marketing right now where people don't really know what we are, which creates curiosity, and that's why a lot of people come. They come the first time for curiosity, but they come the second time because they realize that it's what they actually need. So the what we're doing is, if we imagine that sex is the cherry on the top of the dessert, we're giving them the appetizer, we're giving them the four-course meal, and then we're giving them dessert, and then they can go find the cherry on their own, in their own time, with their own filled up nervous system. Because when I'm in a place of being filled up, I tend to attract and magnetize people who are filled up. When I'm empty and lacking and needy and clingy and neglected, then that tends to be what kind of relationships I bring into my life. So our strategy is really to give people what they've needed their whole lives, to give people intimacy and connection and touch that they needed when they were children or in their teenage years or in their early adult years, and to be able to fill up the cup to that point where sex then becomes an addition to something that they didn't know that they needed. And that's really the realm we're playing in, is like helping someone's nervous system feel safe being themselves and getting nourished, and have that feeling of being filled up without needing to have sex. And then sex may still happen afterwards or in another time, but they feel complete without it.
I love that. It unbiases the sort of unsettled anxiety hunter sort of space that a man may come from. Like, all right, as mammals, men have to do the hunting. Like we have to do the leaning in and the asking and the initial conversation, the approach, even if it's at an event, generally speaking. But that can get biased by the hunger. That can get biased by the diminished, the lack of tribe, the lack of community, the lack of touch. And I do see it and have experienced it playing that part that you're pointing to. One of the questions I have, and I've had them for a month, I'm really excited to finally go through this list, is like, if people are, how do you distinguish codependence on the one side, like thinking you need something outside of you to be okay, versus the needs of the actual nervous system? Like, is there a distinction there for you with that, or?
Yeah, and I want to go back for a second because you just said something I think is really important for men to understand. It was important for me to understand. The story that we need to approach first is actually Zamparion, as we talked about before we got on this call. He says women always approach first. It's just they do it subconsciously through subcommunication, and men approach consciously through conscious communication. So what I mean by that is when I walk into a room and I scan the room, within seconds, I can usually see which women are interested, curious, or attracted to me, and which ones might not be, based on their physiology. Because women respond to a man they're attracted to subconsciously, subperceptually. They subcommunicate. It could be a flicking of the hair, it could be looking down at the ground, it could be showing certain parts of their body, it could be how their body responds. Most men just don't speak this language. So the reason that most men strike out with women is because they're following, they're approaching the women they're attracted to rather than the women who are attracted to them. And so there's this book called Undercover Sex Signals, written by a woman she was a model. She's in her 60s. She talks about this man who's a dentist, and he's not particularly attractive. He's kind of short and balding and overweight, but he could walk into almost any event or any bar in the world and bring out a beautiful woman. And he does it everywhere he goes. And she finally said, "How do you do this?" And he said, "Well, I just look for the women that are attracted to me, and I don't even bother approaching the women that aren't attracted to me."
Hmm.
And my mind was blown because there have been so many times in my life where my attachment wounds would seek the qualifier, the women who, based on my childhood programming, would make me feel like I'm enough. And then I would be attached to those women. And it just so happens that those women were usually not interested in me because that's what my attachment wounds were. Women who weren't there for me. So I would be chasing women that weren't interested and then perpetuating this cycle of feeling not enough, rather than just sitting back and watching for who's interested and approaching those women. And so letting them make the first move subconsciously, subperceptually through their subcommunication, and then approaching from there. And so this is a mind shift for me. It changed everything for me because I realized I don't have to try so hard. I don't have to work so hard to understand the women that are attracted to me. I just have to study the behavior and the communication of women. Like Zamparion says, women always approach first. It's really that simple. And so a man who loves women is loved by women. So when I'm expecting and have an agenda and have an attachment to a certain woman giving me what I want, sure, I'm going to feel neglected or maybe bitter and resentful, and I'm going to be angry at her for not liking me. But attraction, as you and I have already talked about, it's not a choice. It's something subconscious. It's something based on the nervous system. And if a woman's not attracted, she's not attracted. And I could use manipulation techniques like game teaches to seduce her or to play on her attachment wounds. But you and I both know where that goes. And what's the better strategy for me is actually just letting her show me that she's attracted and then making a move from there. My odds are better. My chances are higher, and it's less work.
Mm. Right
Uh,
on.
t- and tell me your question again. It was about whether need we need other people to meet our needs versus how much can we do work on for ourselves. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. My whole model, and that was a great response, by the way. I'm glad you upgraded the conversation in that direction around approaching and women. It was sort of like at the soul level, our we don't, I believe, need anything or anyone outside of us to feel loved or powerful or wealthy or successful. Now, it might be a reclaiming of soul level authority and a plugging into an experience of the divine that's necessary for someone to actually experience that. And until and unless they experience that, they may be walking around as an isolated, atomic, alienated individual, feeling like, okay, well, I need someone to pay attention to me, or else I'm Tom Hanks in Castaway or something. And so I'm curious how you hold the games and what you do in the light of the potential for people to sort of habituate to reaching outside themselves for getting their needs met through the games, and then maybe like leaning on them instead of empowering themselves, which is a little bit of a broader question than just how do we get our needs met through others rather than on our own. Do you hear what I'm asking?
Yeah. So what I'm imagining you're saying is like there are three terms that I think are important here. There's codependency, which we talked about. Codependency is an addiction to validation. In my definition, my therapist helped me understand codependency is an addiction to validation. Independence is kind of the opposite. It's like almost like an addiction to isolation in a way. It's like an isolating or a drawing away from society. And it's sometimes equally as unhealthy as codependency. In fact, independence is almost like avoidance, whereas codependency can sometimes be like more anxious attachment if we were to get into that, but both can be codependency. Interdependence is like the promised land of relationships. It's
Mhm.
where I can meet my own needs that I'm capable of meeting, and I can get my needs met that are needed in community because human beings evolved to sleep beside somebody. We evolved in tribes. We didn't evolve in isolation. So we are designed for the last 35,000, 100,000 years to live and get our needs met in tribe. Our nervous systems are designed to be at optimal state in community, not in isolation. So it's not that we need to be able to get our needs met without people. I don't think that's possible. And we can't get all of our needs met with people either. So that's where interdependence comes in, where I'm responsible for the needs I can meet on my own, and I'm capable of getting my needs met with others. Where it becomes codependency sometimes is when I expect a certain person to meet more needs than they can. So codependency would be me expecting my romantic partner to meet my social needs and my business needs and my romantic needs and my intimacy needs and my family needs, and putting all that pressure on this one person to meet all of my needs, which I've done many times in my life. So that's where it can become dangerous in codependency. Where it becomes interdependence is where I have a social circle, I have a professional circle, I have family relationships, I have romantic, intimate relationships, and I'm getting my needs met from a wide variety of sources. I tell people sometimes that I call myself poly intimate, which is not to do with sexuality, not to do with romance, but that I need to get my needs for intimacy met from many people at many stages. You and I have hugged each other a number of times. So we have an intimate relationship based on hugging. Other people maybe that I have a romantic connection with, or maybe I have, like my brother, I have a hugging relationship with. So I have different needs met. My mom will hold my hand sometimes when I'm driving and just put her arm on my shoulder and show me love that way, which she never did most of my life. So I tell myself that as human beings, we're poly-intimate creatures. We're designed to get our needs for intimacy met from many people. And so the games are designed to help us meet those primal needs, those needs for intimacy from many people. So, and that's why I created them, because I needed that. I needed to have my needs met from many people without expecting one person to meet all my needs, and then not having friends or family that meet my intimate needs, and then feeling neglected and starved most of the time, and then putting a lot of pressure on one person to meet all of these needs.
I love this. I absolutely resonate. We thrive in tribe, and there are needs we can meet on our own. There are needs we can't without other people. And being willing to, I mean, yeah, well, one of my mentors, he says, we do the wrong thing so long the right thing feels wrong. So initially, it's going to be clunky, clumsy, new, and perhaps a little weird and difficult, but building a social circle and a tribe where one is meeting those needs. Do you think that's, I mean, it sounds like it's an active, specific responsibility for everyone in the modern world. Is that like, because they're not going to get it intrinsically. They might get some measure of it, but is that kind of like if we could take the games and turn it into like at the end say, all right, now to have this perpetuate, well, I mean, I guess that's your either your facilitator training because you're supporting and aiming at facilitators. But if we were looking at like the rank and file, how would we take the principles of the games and the movement and translate them effectively into marching orders for people who want to thrive socially and in this kind of tribal situation?
Yeah, so maybe I'll share a little bit about what conscious intimacy games are. So conscious intimacy games are talk and touch based games that are designed to help us create the kind of relationships that most people have never even dreamed of, let alone experienced. More than 60% of people report being lonely and disconnected. And I tell myself that the number is likely significantly higher than that. It's just that people don't know how to explain what being disconnected even is, because most people don't know that they're disconnected. Most people don't have a language to explain what is it like when your needs for connection aren't met. Like when we're thirsty, we drink something. When we're hungry, we eat something. But what do we do when we're socially starved? Most of us don't have an answer for that. We just go to sex. Or we get drunk and hang out with people, and that's when we hug our friends. I don't drink anymore, but I used to. That's how I would get my social needs met, is through alcohol and drugs and whatever else. And so I've been a martial artist for over 30 years. And in martial arts, it's incredibly intimate. I mean, you're sparring with people in stand-up martial arts like Muay Thai and karate. In jiu-jitsu, you're literally rolling on the ground with people. You're spending an hour or two rolling on the ground with people. If someone was to take pictures of people practicing jujitsu, you might think they're cuddling. It looks almost identical to some of the games we play, like that holding game we play. It looks like taking someone's back in jujitsu. It's like they look very similar. So I created conscious intimacy games to be a martial art for our relationships that equips us with the skills to, first of all, protect ourselves in a psychotic world. I tell myself our world is in mass psychosis because of the level of trauma, because of the level of neglect and challenges that happen in the world. This is a scientific opinion. It's not my opinion. Dr. Jeremy Griffiths is a biologist who teaches that the world's in mass psychosis. He's been studying human history and human psychology for most of his life. And so I created conscious intimacy games first to equip us with the tools to protect ourselves in the world by using nonviolent practices, but also to equip us with the tools to get our needs met, which I tell myself is also a self-defense technique. Because if I'm starved for intimacy, I'm in my lower primal mind. I'm not giving, I'm not sharing, I'm not loving, I'm not compassionate. When my needs aren't met, I'm selfish. I'm self-centered. I'm narcissistic. I'm angry. I'm resentful. I'm bitter. I'm aggressive. So I created conscious intimacy games to arm humanity with what we need most of all, which is the tools to connect, because I didn't learn them. And most people that I meet have never learned how to connect in a healthy way. In fact, most people learn how to connect through people pleasing and being dishonest and manipulating and pretending we're someone we're not so that we can get love and acceptance. So the games are something you could do with your mom or something you could do with your sister or your brother, or you can play them with somebody that you're attracted to, and it'll be a very different experience depending on who you're playing with. And so these games are designed to, again, repattern our nervous system and help us create new neural pathways for how to connect so that when we're in social situations, we have the tools. Like a martial arts class, a person goes to one martial arts class, they don't know enough to protect themselves. And they'll learn that quickly if they get into a conflict. Similarly, if we read a book like Nonviolent Communication or Radical Honesty, we're not going to have enough tools to protect ourselves in a real social situation. And we're not going to have the tools to thrive. So it's something we have to practice regularly. So I created the games as a place for people to practice regularly so they can develop those new habits of connecting so that when they're in a place where they need to connect, they have new tools to draw from.
Hmm. I love that. I mean, like, we aren't given this growing up. I wasn't, for sure. And it leads me to some curiosity. So, 30 years as a martial artist, how has um, your engagement with the world of coaching and then also with facilitating and relationship been inflected by your experience as a martial artist?
I mean, my first coaches were martial artists. My first coaches were a master, a black belt in karate, multiple black belts in karate, and then a Muay Thai champion, and then jiu-jitsu champions. And these are extremely dangerous people who have achieved extraordinarily high levels of success. And they achieved it through discipline, through humility, through respect, through consistent practice, through having a beginner's mind if I don't know what I don't know. When we think of the most successful societies and cultures all throughout history, they were run by martial artists. I mean, even society now, the most successful countries have the most disciplined militaries. We are run by martial arts on a global level. The most successful and fruitful countries have the greatest militaries. So this is not a new concept. It's an ancient idea. And so coaching was well, I was first exposed to it in martial arts. And then in 2016, when I started working with Rich Litvin and his family, the author of The Prosperous Coach, in his book, The Prosperous Coach, he has a belt system to help you determine what level you're at as a martial artist. He continually references martial arts, and the discipline required in martial arts is the same discipline required in healing and in shamanism and different types of medicine healing. When I retired from mixed martial arts, I traveled to Peru and started working with some shamans, medicine healers who are indigenous medicine healers and high performance coaches. They were all martial artists as well. The shamans I work with were highly trained in martial arts, Tai Chi, Kung Fu, kickboxing, because the spiritual path and the martial arts path were one in the same in our ancient history. Martial arts were esoteric practices. Kung Fu is an esoteric practice. It's very spiritual. Tai Chi, karate, they're all very spiritual practices rooted around honor, again, respect and a higher power. Bruce Lee said, when I punch, I don't punch, it punches through me. What is the it? We talked about this in the games. The it is something that we can't quantify. We can't define what the it is. Martial artists might call it flow state or being in the zone. Shamans and mystics might call it a higher power or the higher self. In the 12-step community, they'll call it God, creator, or the higher self, or a higher power. Again, it's this mystical question mark that we don't know how to explain it. So conscious intimacy games are based on that idea that there's something greater, and that when we come together, that something greater is present with us, and that when we reach our highest potential, it's us surrendering to a higher power and a higher will rather than trying to be that higher will. In coaching, my coaches taught me that I'm not the coach. I'm just holding space for it to coach through me, whatever that it is. And when two of us come together, that it becomes present and is there with us and is there in the work with us. So Rich Litvin says coaching is just a name that we give leadership, there's many names for it, but it's really wisdom. It's really the process of self-questioning and a conversation we're having with that deeper part of ourselves.
Mm, beautiful. Um, my curiosity from there is what is the spiritual backdrop for the conscious intimacy games? As precise as you want to be, I mean, seldom do facilitators in Austin have the balls to have an open Bible in the room as a structural necessity component of their games. And I'm curious what your thoughts or context for that is.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few layers to it. So again, my background is after I retired from mixed martial arts, I became initiated into ceremonial magic. And then from there, I traveled to Peru and started working with indigenous shamans. And then from there, I had visions where Christ talked to me and told me to start studying Hebrew mysticism. And then I started studying Kabbalah. So my background is multifaceted. And what I discovered in indigenous shamanism, in ceremonial high magic, in Christianity, and in Kabbalah, which is Hebrew mysticism and rooted in Judaism, is they all center around a single fundamental teaching. And the teaching can be understood in this symbol on my ring, which is the tetragrammaton, the six-pointed star, and also associated with the name Yud He Vav He, which is the original name of God in the Bible, one of the names of God in the Bible. And Yud He Vav He is the four elements, fire, air, water, and earth, which everything in nature is composed of the four elements. Fire represents plasma, like electricity and fire. Air represents gas, like oxygen and all the other gases. Water represents liquid and all the liquids in the universe. And then earth represents physical matter. Everything in nature is composed of these elements. Indigenous shamanism agrees with that. Kabbalah agrees with that. Ceremonial magic agrees with that. Christianity at its core agrees with that. And so the idea is that the universe is composed of elements, and that's all that we really know exists. Well, we are also those elements. I am the four elements as well. And in Kabbalah, they're associated with the mental body, which is the element air, the spiritual body, which is the element fire, the emotional body, which is the element water, and then the physical body, which is the element earth. So I am Yud He Vav He, and the universe is Yud He Vav He. So the external elements and my internal elements are reflections of one another. So conscious intimacy games are based on this idea that you are the creator, or at least the vessel through which the creator creates in your experience of reality. I'm the vessel through which the creator creates in my experience of reality. When I get into Kabbalistic mysticism and ceremonial magic and Christian mysticism, it's the idea that the Messiah lives inside of every one of us. It's beneath the character, beneath the ego identity, that true self, which Internal Family Systems by Dick Schwartz or Richard Schwartz, he talks about it, calling it the self. And in ceremonial high magic, we call it the higher self. And in Christianity, we call it the Christ self. In Kabbalah, we call it the Adam Kadmon. We call it the true higher self. So conscious intimacy games are based on this idea that there's a self inside of you beneath the programming and the conditioning. And if you can connect with that self, you can achieve greater miracles than Christ achieved. He said it himself, you will achieve greater things than I. He also said, is it not written in your law that ye are all gods? And he's quoting a passage from the Old Testament, which is what Kabbalah is based on. So in my studies as a healer, which I obsessed just as much as my martial arts studies, I discovered that there is this fundamental teaching, that there's a higher self inside of us all, that we're all miraculous healers, we're all profoundly powerful beyond our wildest dreams. And so conscious intimacy games are designed to help us invoke that part of ourselves. You've seen our card deck that we have, and the card deck separated into darkness, which is what the talk-based games are based on, and light, which is what the touch-based games are based on. So what we're doing is working with the darkness and the light. We're working with our shadow and we're working with our higher self in the games to help us integrate those two aspects of ourselves and recognize that the darkness in the world, the darkness in the external world, is a reflection of the darkness that I'm carrying inside of myself. As within, so without. So I don't have to change other people. I don't have to change the world. I just have to change myself and the world will change. So that's the fundamental teaching behind conscious intimacy games. And then our logo is kind of like those two hands, that unity of the darkness and the light, the unity of duality coming together as one thing so that we can recognize the unity in all things and the oneness of reality. Another thing I'll say about this is in Kabbalah and in Christianity, there's a fundamental teaching that they both share. And it's in the New Testament when the Torah scholars said to Jesus, what's the most important commandment? And Jesus said, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, which means, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And this teaching teaches the oneness of reality. And then he said, love God with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. And he said, the second commandment is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And so I tell myself that what this teaching is teaching us is that everything is one, everything is God, and our neighbor it's just as important as the first commandment to love God, because our neighbor is also God. and our neighbor is also ourselves. And so this oneness principle, this oneness idea is what conscious intimacy games are rooted in. And the last thing I'll share about it is like conscious means to be awake and aware, and intimacy means to know one's true self and the true selves of others. So the games are games that are designed to help you become awake and aware of who you really are, because once you know who you are, you can see that in others.
Mm. It's brilliant. I used to say the only thing worth selling is God, and that all I do as a business and a relationship coach is, to a certain degree, while still effective in those areas, like camouflage for profound personal and spiritual development. And I love that that layer is present in your work as well, where it's, I'm here to help you wake up to your Christ self, to your higher and your divine self. And as you do that, your relationships in your life will get better. I'm imagining that's a side benefit. Yes.
Yeah, and I actually want to say that I didn't create conscious intimacy games.
Hmm. What did
Conscious intimacy games were a vision that I had in meditation after years of praying to God and asking, how can I create peace on earth? What is the thing that humanity needs most of all? And what I discovered is that the solution to all of our problems in humanity is empathy, compassion, and connection. These aren't my opinions. These are scientific facts. The way that humanity reaches peace on earth and the end of conflict and the end of war, which many systems, indigenous systems, spiritual systems, Kabbalah, Christianity, these systems have been promising this time in the future where we would all live as one community, one family, and one tribe. And I prayed and I prayed and I said, how can I contribute? And I heard the words conscious intimacy games. And so what I learned in my own spiritual path in alchemy, there are 7 steps in the alchemical process to go from lead to gold, or from ignorance to awareness and remembering. But there's a secret 8th step that most people don't know about. Have you heard about the 8th step?
No.
The 8th step is multiplication and replication.
Hmm.
And it's based on the idea that I can't reach my full potential until I'm living in a community with people who are reaching their full potential. So at a certain, which I tell myself is what Jesus eventually recognized, and Lao Tzu and the Buddha, they all realized that the only way they could really reach their full potential is if they're able to lead others there as well. So I created conscious intimacy games for myself. I didn't create it, but I became the creator of it for myself to reach enlightenment. And it just so happens that I can't get there alone. And so I created it for myself to have those relationships, for myself to have that life and reality. Because according to conscious intimacy games, there is no one else. Everything is a reflection of me. My reality is a mirror of me. So if I want to live in a peaceful society, I have to become the person who lives in the peaceful society first, and then I have to be able to lead others there as well. That's the dharma, or that's the purpose of every human being, is to elevate humanity. In Kabbalah, they call it tikkun olam, repairing the world. So if I want to live in that messianic age, or that promised land, or that new world, or fifth dimension, or whatever you want to call it, I have to become the person who creates that in my reality.
Hmm. It makes me so curious. How would you respond to the conversation for, like, if it appears without though it is within, right? We're manifesting our reality with our subconscious beliefs, our blocks, like, and civilization as a whole is a reflection of that. Um, is it the practice of like relieving pressure and pain in the nervous system, or uh, meeting our needs through creating structures and communities that will enable us to thrive? Or like what is the ultimate path that an individual must walk in order to achieve this kind of spiritual thriving that you're pointing to?
I think if I was to summarize it down into a single lesson or a single teaching, it would be compassion. It's the only way. And the thing that we see in the world, with all the separation, with all the conflict, with all of the my way is right, your way is wrong, it's a lack of compassion. And I've learned in my own path toward compassion that the only way that I can have compassion for others is to have it for myself first. So compassion is first an inside job that extends outward. So when I see these spiritual systems judging others, I've met spiritual masters and they're so compassionate. They're so inclusive. They're so tolerant too. That was an important word that one of my mentors taught me: tolerance. It's like, how tolerant am I of other viewpoints? How tolerant am I of other people's perspectives? How tolerant am I of other people's political beliefs and views? It's like when I'm triggered and I want to change other people and I think my way is right, I'm not being tolerant and therefore I'm not being compassionate. So it's like this is what's missing in the world is compassion. Remember, when we do the cuddle puddle, we've got 30 or 40 people from all walks of life that are cuddling together in 3 hours. You know, if you told them when they arrived, I imagine if we told them when they arrived in 3 hours from now, you're going to be cuddling with strangers on the floor, they'd probably say, there's no way I'm going to be doing that. Yet in 3 hours, it happens every single time. And not everyone's in the middle, not everyone's fully involved, but they're involved to the level that they feel comfortable. And it's amazing what can happen in 3 hours. So I feel disappointed and maybe even have some, I don't know if righteous anger toward the world leaders. Because if we have these brilliant people in the world, but they can't get their country in a cuddle puddle in 3 hours, what the hell is wrong with our leaders? Why do we have leaders that are running the world that are judging other leaders? Why do we have leaders running the world that are winning their elections through judgment and judging others and talking bad about other people? Like this is what we've created in our society. And again, if I take responsibility for that and I say this is what I created in my reality, this is what I have created, and so again, it's my responsibility to become the difference that I want to see in the world.
So it's cool that you bring up the possibility of like deep, visceral, embodied intimacy globally. And just like you say in the games, there's the one game where it's like touch, and you always quote one of your teachers saying, "Well, if you can't create sexual pleasure in someone through just touching their hands, then like what are you really doing?" In the same way, like if you can't create this depth of intimacy, then what are you really doing? And it's just like a game of ego, need, and survival politics largely, which is a whole direction we could go. But I want to double click on this. Some questions I have about the games itself, like as a shaman, you must believe in entities, yes? Like spiritual beings that are not identical with us, that can inhabit us or be called into us or removed from us. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, I mean, there are different ways. There are different terms. You know, there's intrusions, there's entities, there's engrams in Scientology, there's demons in Christianity, and these other systems. I would imagine them to be intelligent packets of energy, like a trauma. They're intelligent packets of energy that are embedded in our nervous system. In parts therapy, we call them parts,
Hmm.
simply, just parts. They're parts of us. They're fragmented parts of our personality. They're sub-personalities. Do they get it? Do they get attached to us from others? Well, what others?
Hmm.
Where are the others? Point to the others. So it's a yes and kind of question. We talked a little bit about this outside of the podcast, which is like, well, is there a risk of people taking on those energies when they're practicing intimacy in this close of a quarter? It's the same thing about being in an ayahuasca ceremony and sitting beside somebody. Is there a danger of taking on their energy? And there are different philosophies and perspectives, but I'll tell you what mine is. So when I create a conscious intimacy games event, before anyone even shows up, the reason there's a Bible there, the reason there's candles burning, the reason there's a shamanic rattle there, the reason there's a portion of the Zohar there, the reason there's the card deck there, which is all white, these are tools these are symbols to me, tools that represent something, and they represent the light of the Creator. They represent a sacred space of protection where transformation happens. And so can people take on entities inside of a conscious intimacy game space? Maybe. I mean, they could take on entities watching reality TV. They could take on entities eating McDonald's. In fact, if you ask a Jew, every food that most people eat is just poisoning themselves. I mean, if you don't pray a certain way after using the bathroom, according to Kabbalah and Judaism, you're allowing negative energy to be taken into your body. If you gossip about someone, you're opening yourself up to negative energy. If you entertain any negativity whatsoever, you're opening yourself up to negativity. So sure, there's a possibility that people can take on negative energy when they're practicing intimacy with anyone. And in the space that we're creating, the intention, like you hear me asking everyone at the beginning, like, you know, the idea is not to take, it's to give, it's to come from an energy of giving, not taking. If they ignore that advice
Hmm.
and they focus on taking, sure, they're going to be open up, they're going to get what they give. And so if they come there with an energy of taking, They may leave with something they don't want, like an attachment wound being activated or a trauma being activated. If they listen and respect the boundaries and they listen to the guidance and the directions, they may leave with less. They may leave with less pain, less trauma, less entities, if you want to call them that. And so, and like you had and I hope you're okay with me sharing, you had an emotional release last night. I would imagine you left with less than
Mhm.
you came with because of the release. There were a couple of people that cried in the games, and I imagine they left with less than they came with. And similarly, some people come and they have an energy of taking, an energy of getting, and they may leave with more than they came with. They may leave with some shame. They may leave with some guilt or some regret, or they may have an attachment wound opened up. As a medicine healer, my job is to create a safe space. My job is to intend for the betterment, to the highest good of everyone there, and to trust the medicine, and to trust that what we're doing is creating the outcome that they need. Sometimes I need to feel bad before I feel better. You know, if you think about if somebody has a tumor, we have to cut the stomach open so we can remove the tumor. So sometimes we have to create pain in order to remove poison. And you know, if we looked at just cutting the stomach open and we stopped the movie there, we would say, "Oh my God, you just cut somebody's stomach open. That's terrible." Yeah, but I had to so I could remove the tumor. Oh well, that's different. So sometimes there's a trauma that gets activated. Sometimes there's pain that becomes triggered. Sometimes there's all sorts of things that can happen. And I tell myself that's part of the healing process. It's part of the intention. But to kind of bring it back to it from a Kabbalistic perspective or a tantric perspective, the reason we don't have kissing and the reason we don't have genital touching and the reason we don't have nudity and the reason we don't have sex at these games is because from my understanding and my background, that's when we really open ourselves up to entanglement. That's when we really open ourselves up to, in Kabbalah, they will call it tikkun being transferred. Transferring the belief in Kabbalah is like when you kiss somebody, you're transferring your negative energy back and forth. When you have sex with somebody, you're transferring your negative energy back and forth, positive and negative, but we're talking about negative right now. So there is this opening that happens. There's this portal that's opened, and the negative. So, for example, let's say you have money problems, and the girl you're having sex with has self-image problems. You may take on her self-image problems. She may take on your money problems.
Mhm.
And now you've exchanged this tikkun or exchanged this karma or whatever term you want to use. You've exchanged this conditioning and programming now. And now you have to do extra work because you have to clear the shit that she gave you. And she has to clear what you gave her. So in the games, because I'm creating a sacred space, because the intention is healing, and because there are certain symbols and tools, and even every time I hit the rattle, it's shaking up the energy, it's breaking apart the energy. Those are all things I imagine. But is any of it true? I mean, it's all imagination. So I don't know if it's true. But the thing I do notice is that when people practice regularly, their relationships get better, their lives get better, they get healthier, they get happier, and they feel more at home inside of themselves. So there's a passage in the Bible where the Torah scholars are accusing Jesus of casting out demons in the name of Beelzebub, the prince of the demons. And Jesus said, "How can that be possible? If Satan cast out Satan, his kingdom would fall. So if I'm casting out demons in the name of Beelzebub, then his kingdom could not stand. But if I'm doing the work of God and the work is, these are my words now, the work is healing people, then you know that you're in the presence of God." So when we look at the games and we look at the results of over 60 events and 10 retreats, what we see is consistently positive results. So is there entanglement? Maybe. Is there attachment stuff happening? Maybe. Are there entities? Maybe. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. It depends on the person. You know, there was a person at the games last night who I noticed was quite attached to who he wanted to play with and who he didn't want to play with. He had attachments that were coming up. And I noticed that he was trying to avoid a certain type of partner and he kept getting matched with that person. And so these dynamics happen sometimes in the games too. If I'm attached to only playing with a certain person, I might not get to play with that person at all. So these things happen already inside the experience. So again, to answer the question, it's like, I don't know. I don't have a spectrometer or some device that can see if there's entities being attached to people or not being attached to people. But what we do see through consistent practice is positive results and people having happier, healthier relationships.
Amazing. Um, what cities are the games in? By now, I'm sure our listeners are curious to experience them for themselves.
Yeah, so right now we have games happening in Canada on the East Coast. We have facilitators being trained in Denver. We have facilitators being trained in Mexico. We have facilitators being trained in Austin.
Mm, fantastic. And then the online games, is there an open capacity for people to enter those, or are those just for the 2 weeks for people after they've attended locally?
Yeah, so that's what we call Conscious Intimacy Academy, which is our community of people who are practicing regularly. We have 2 calls per week now. We've been going for almost 3 years. So in February, it'll be 3 years. Sometimes we open up enrollment for new members, and then we close enrollment for a period of time to let those new members get their habit, practice habit developed, and then we'll open it up again. So right now we are opening up in the new year. It's consciousintimacygames.com/academy. So people can come and get a membership where they get 2 games per week, 2 calls per week, plus they get to come to the in-person games as well as part of that. So where if they're in a local area where the games are happening, they can come to those games as well. We also have our retreats that we host a few times a year. We have one coming up in Austin, January 23rd to 25th.
Fantastic. So that was just while we were there thinking of it. I'm curious, what does it take to thrive, in your view, as a man in the modern world in dating and relationship, like sexually, emotionally, relationally? Super curious. It's a kind of core kernel of this podcast.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the answer to that question hasn't changed in thousands of years, and it's purpose. And that's it. It's simple. David Data explains it deeply in the book, The Way of the Superior Man. A man without purpose distracts himself with pleasure. I forget who said that, but it was I think it was an ancient Greek or Roman philosopher. A man without purpose distracts himself with pleasure. And our society is more tempting in terms of pleasure now than ever in the history of humanity. There are more temptations than ever before. I mean, now there's even AI tempting us with sexual posts and videos and reels, and so you don't even know if it's real anymore. I can't. Sometimes I see videos and I'm like, or a post, I'm looking at it from, I'm like, well, I didn't even know this isn't real. So I imagine that's only going to get worse. So the ability to be distracted by pleasure is not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. And I could tell you that when I've had the most fulfilling relationships with women, where it's women I've been most attracted to, it was when I was most on purpose.
Hmm.
The most difficult relationships, the most dramatic relationships, the most entangled and enmeshed relationships were where I made the woman my purpose. And this is continued. This is consistent throughout human history. It's the men that are the what we might call them alpha males or whatever we want to call them. The men who are most sought after are the most purposeful men. Think of like what's his name, James Dean. He's always kind of got this pulled back, and James Bond too. They're like they always are. They love the woman, and they're like, sorry, I have to go, and she's like, no, please don't leave. It's like in the movie. Coach Corey Wayne talks about this. The movie with Russell. What was it? I forget the movie. It was the boxing movie. He's a champion. It's a true story. I forget what it's
Rocky?
called, but what is it?
Is it Rocky or
No, it wasn't Rocky. It was Russell, the guy that played Gladiator. What was his name?
Russell Crowe?
Russell Crowe, and I think it was called the contender or the champion or something. But anyway, he's a boxer, and he ends up becoming he's supposed to just be a fill-in for some boxing match, and he ends up winning, and then he gets a chance at the championship, and his wife's like, "I'm not supporting you for this. That guy's killed people in the ring. I'm not supporting you." He says, "I have to do this. It's my purpose. It's my job. I have to do it." And she's like, "I'm not going to watch the fight." And then he goes and he fights. And of course, she goes and watches the fight because the feminine, I tell myself, can't resist a purposeful masculine. It's irresistible. A masculine in his purpose is divinely aligned. He's aligned with his greatest potential. He's aligned with his whole reason for being alive. And so when a man is on purpose, he becomes magnetic. Look at a man who is on purpose. When he walks in the room, people feel his presence before they even see him.
Hmm.
But what about a man who's not on purpose, who's chasing validation or chasing pleasure or chasing attention from women or whatever? He's ignored, not even noticed most of the time. In fact, sometimes people even feel uncomfortable with him. And I've been both guys. I've been the guy on purpose. I've been the guy seeking approval and validation. And so I think that's it. It's like it's never going to change. The human brain has not changed in the last 10,000 years all that much, or in the last 50,000 years, and it's certainly not going to change in the last 100 years. So even though there's more pleasures, there's more distractions, there's more ways to distract ourselves than ever in history, what attracts the world is the same as it's always been, and it's a man that's on purpose. It becomes, again, he becomes magnetic, and everything he wants comes to him. Not just women, but in the way of the superior man, and Zamparion talks about this, and Kabbalah talks about this. Reality is the feminine.
Hmm.
And when a man is on purpose, he is the masculine. He's the light. And so the feminine, meaning money, meaning material things, meaning women, meaning people, are naturally magnetically gravitated towards the man who's on purpose.
This is beautiful. So as a business coach, I've observed this, and it's a certain sine qua non, like without which nothing really moves in the lives of really successful facilitators and coaches. Where the one of my mentors, we created this money magic alignment course, and one of our distinctions was purpose is the energy of purpose is like a river, and you would never confuse a leaf being moved by the river for the river itself. So the abundance, the ease with which one manifests things comes about through one being connected to that energy. And in my personal experience, I've managed just to be really vulnerable and authentic through bravado, bluster, confidence, charisma, uh, and my innate intelligence to inspire people to follow me and to have coaching from me. And I even have some skills as a facilitator. But for me, purpose, it seems to exist somewhere between invention and discovery. And for me, like, I would love to have handed to me on a silver platter at an ayahuasca ceremony, like, your purpose is to create conscious intimacy games. Go do this. And then to be following the commission. But I've never had that experience. It's always occurred as well, at first, 10 years ago, it was like, I want to make six figures as a coach so I can continue to have the life of freedom that I have now at this brain supplement startup. And then I fought and I struggled and I learned and I figured it out. And then as I was moving through that journey, I was like, what am I for? Like, even if I had that freedom, what would that freedom be for? And I think this is the question that probably anyone who gets successful will then ask. And some of them, like Robin Williams or Michael Jackson, or whoever it was, that there's been several like who they achieve the height in their career and then they kill themselves because that's all that they're here for, or that's all that they see to be here for. And there's definitely, I have perceived, I've touched it, I've experienced it in moments, spikes in facilitation where I know that something is moving through me that is meant to be beyond me, beyond anything that I've created. And yet, it's been this struggling, staggering, limping at times experience in my career as a coach and facilitator to have traction. Part of that has been bad marketing and ineffectual discipline for sure, or just missing skills. But the thing that I look at, and one of my clients, he definitely was living in his purpose, and he brought in 30 grand in a week using the same principles and strategies and structures that I have. And I was looking at this and I was like, well, how do I get to the experience of my purpose? I mean, I consciously, intellectually, mentally orient myself towards the practice of sort of deontologically act from being a contribution. Like take myself out of the equation and do my best to include other people in my calculations and operate in a way that is of service. Like, and that feels good, but the fact of the matter is, it's an intellectual game ultimately. It's founded on the premise that operating by these principles will produce better results in my experience viscerally and emotionally for me and for others. It's not this organic, holistic upwelling and overflowing of a kind of energetic frequency range or a core kernel of Dharma. And so I'm curious, like for you, because I discern it in you. I discern exactly that, driven by the engine of Dharma in you. Uh, how did you get to it? Like, how did you wake it up in you? And how do you know that you're in it?
Mm. The simplest definition of purpose that I resonate with comes from Kabbalah. And I said earlier that Kabbalah talks about tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. That's the purpose of every human being, is to repair the world. It's like, well, to what outcome? Well, depending on how big a person can dream, the outcome could be like my dream, my vision, peace on earth, real peace on earth, to the point where even death is no longer necessary. Most people can't even fathom that idea. They can't even imagine no more death, no more disease, maybe, no more poverty, maybe, no more crime, maybe, but no more death. That's like, okay, that's too far. I can't imagine a world without that possibility anymore. I've hypnotized myself to believe it. So the easiest way for one to determine their purpose is to ask the question, what unique gifts and talents do I have that can serve the purpose of repairing the world? And the Kabbalists teach that if you fully live your purpose, you won't taste death. You will reach the world to come. You will reach immortality. You will serve your purpose as a human being and therefore transcend the need to remain in this world. I'd love to tell a quick little story. A man named Billy Phillips was a student of Rav Berg. Rav Berg was one of the greatest Kabbalist authorities of our time. And he said, a long, long time ago, we were in heaven with God and it was perfect. There was no sickness, there was no poverty, there was no disease, not even any death. All of our desires were fulfilled. And one day, God gave us a piece of cake. And it was the most wonderful piece of cake that could ever be created in the universe. I mean, God created it. It was perfect. Every bite was like an orgasm through our whole body. It was bliss. And one day we said, God, we want to make the cake even better. And God said, well, how can I make the cake better for you? We said, we want to make the cake ourselves. We want to put in our own personal touch. So God, having loved us unconditionally, didn't just break the cake down into the most basic ingredients. He broke the universe down into the most basic ingredients. And we've been rebuilding the heavenly kingdom ever since, except this time we get to feel as if we created it with God instead of God creating it for us, because we wanted to be like the creator. We didn't want to be vessels that only receive. We wanted to be vessels that receive for the purpose of sharing. And that's the purpose of humanity, to transform our selfish desire to receive for the self alone into the desire to receive for the purpose of sharing. And so our purpose as human beings is to transform our selfish desires, to give ourselves to a higher purpose of transforming humanity, and to use our unique gifts and talents in our zone of genius to serve humanity so that we never feel like we're working even a day in our lives. We always feel like we're living in the bliss of doing exactly what we're here to do.
That's brilliant, and I especially love the story. And again, for me, it's not that I don't, and this is not a coaching session. This is just I like to be the guinea pig on my podcast for people with expertise, so that my people, leaders go first. They start to see themselves in me. Um, I definitely have the experience that I'm skilled in speaking, facilitating, coaching, teaching, training, shining and sharing from stages. And yet it may simply be a matter of the maturation of the gifts that are inside of me. I had a friend yesterday. I was telling him it's been the most difficult year of my life so far and a lot of suffering. And he said, well, please understand and trust and know that you're actually being formed for a greater use through all of these trials and these tribulations and these terrible difficulties. And yeah, I'm curious what your journey was from knowing that you were called to a purpose through the maturation into the level of skill and expertise and embodiment that you have today.
Mm. Well, I mean, when I started to discover what I call my purpose, it felt more like a remembering than a discovering.
Hmm.
It was more like I've always known that I was here for this purpose, but I didn't know what it would look like or how it would become. In The Way of the Superior Man by David Data, he talks about how the masculine goes through levels of purpose. So people might say, well, was your purpose to be an MMA fighter? At that time, yes, because I was inspiring people who were homeless and jobless, like I was, to believe that they can do anything. And then when I was a nutrition coach, was that part of my purpose? Yes. I was inspiring people who had eating disorders to believe that they could then become somebody who holds space for others. So there's layers of purpose. And he says the masculine goes through a layer of purpose followed by a period of waiting for a vision. And the period of waiting for a vision can be boring, it can be depressing, it can be confusing, it can feel like we're going nowhere, it can feel like nothing's happening, but that's where we're waiting for a vision. And then we have the next layer of purpose, and then we're waiting for a vision. We go through these periods consistently as the masculine. So for me, studying spiritual systems like Kabbalah helped me see that my purpose, that I tell myself that I'm remembering, is something that humanity has been prophesying about for thousands of years. This idea that there is a world to come, that there will be a time where humanity would be at peace. So the question I ask myself is, well, do I have to wait 100, 200, 300 more years for that to happen? If my reality is a reflection of me, can't I just manifest that reality now? And so I decided that why couldn't it? Why can't I? Why can't I manifest peace on earth? What would be the secret? Well, first it would be developing an undying faith and certainty that that's possible. And then it would be surrounding myself with people who reflect that reality back to me. And then it would be doing my own work and contributing in the way that I'm most uniquely suited to do. And it would be dreaming bigger than I've ever dreamed before. When I first started this journey, I didn't believe that these things were possible. But now I can't imagine another reality. I have a client who's a 70-year-old transgender woman. And she said when she started working with me, this whole idea of peace on earth sounded ridiculous to her. Now she can't imagine any other outcome for humanity. So we see what we are in the world. And so when I was hurting, when I was selfish, when I was narcissistic, not that I'm not those things now sometimes because I am, but when I was more those things than I am now, I couldn't imagine that type of world because I wasn't that type of person. But now I can imagine that type of world because I'm becoming that type of person.
Mm. I love that. Your purpose evolves with you. You evolve through different layers of your purpose, and there becomes an inevitability to the vision that you've been handed or that you've discerned that is fed by your faith. And then I like to tell my clients, you feed your vision until your vision feeds you, and you hold it in your head until you can hold it in your hand. But for you, it sounds like your your vision, it was something that was feeding you before it had as much coherent clarity and specificity as it does now. And as you've given yourself to the feeding of it, it has taken deeper root and the frame has grown stronger inside of you. Is that correct? Am I hearing that or?
Yeah, in 2016 on an ayahuasca ceremony, I received the vision that I'm here to lead a revolution that will change the world. And I didn't know what that looked like in 2016. I didn't know how I would contribute to that. Conscious intimacy games now make sense. I can see how conscious intimacy games, being in jails, being in retirement homes, being in school systems, being in universities, being in the government, being in offices like Google or Facebook, I could see how it could change the world. So I held the vision, or rather, not even the vision, but well, yeah, the vision of being that person who changes the world and recognizing that there is an essence inside of me, call it the Christ, call it the Buddha, call it the whatever you want to call it. That essence exists inside of us all. And if I am that thing, then I have the potential to change the whole world. And so does everyone else. So my job really is not to light fire inside of others, but to fan the fire that already exists inside of others so that they can all find their piece of the puzzle. If I imagine that the perfected world is a jigsaw puzzle, which piece is less important than all the others?
Mm, none.
They're all equally important. This is the Kabbalistic teaching as well. So my job, I tell myself, part of my purpose is to help other people find their place in the puzzle, find their usefulness, their purpose in the greater scheme of things, so that we together can create that world.
Mm. The light ignites light in others. It's like a you're at a ceremony and someone hands you a candle and you have your own candle and then you light others people's.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's like I imagine that that pilot light is already lit in others. My job is actually to fuel that light
Hmm.
that already exists in others. I used to think that my job was to light the light in others.
Huh.
And in a way, maybe it is. And now I see it more as no, that you already have that light in you. I'm not here to give you something you don't have. I'm here to fuel something you already have.
As opposed to rescuing, fixing, and changing someone else.
Exactly. That's the differentiation I made.
Huh. Um, Last like 3 or 4 questions. When it comes to the games, have you noticed, given it's kind of an artificial induction or stimulation and production of oxytocin and other neurochemicals? Like there's a spike. It's designed to produce something where that spike would not exist. Otherwise, it would not work. Otherwise, the cuddle puddle would not happen at the end. People wouldn't be feeling open in the way that they are. And it's productive. It's amazing. It's really brilliant and beautiful. However, like what I have found with events like this and also with things like Tantra Speed Date is there's such a uh, gear shift up into like a new plateau that there can often be a dramatic downshift because now it's like the system remembers, oh, this is this is what it feels like to be nourished. And then the next day I go back personally to my computer and my house and my solopreneurship game and or even that same night. And there I perceive in myself like a drop in oxytocin or a diminishing of that feeling. How would you recommend, and we are talking about aftercare just before this, but yeah, I mean, how would you recommend people deal with that experience?
It's the same thing I said earlier. It's about regular practice. So you can't come to one experience and expect your nervous system to change. But the nervous system is adaptable and plastic. The brain and the nervous system are plastic. So what I mean by that is that you come to one experience, you have a peak experience, but it's not a lived experience yet. It's just a peak experience. Again, it's like going to a martial arts class. You have a profound realization of like, oh my God, I know how to throw a punch now. But if you don't go practice that punch, you're gonna slip back into your conditioning. You're gonna slip back into what's normal for you, your familiar range of emotional experiences. But if you come enough and you come consistently enough and you develop the tools to get your needs met, like what's wrong with going to a coffee shop and asking a stranger for a hug? What's wrong with I have roommates? What's wrong with me asking my roommates for a hug? What's wrong with eye gazing with somebody I'm walking by on the street? It's the same thing. So it's not meant to be a peak experience only. It's meant to be a peak experience to give you a glimpse of what's possible, followed by consistent practice with our community and then consistent application outside of the community.
Hmm.
Again, if you practice in a martial arts community, but then you get into a street conflict and you don't use your tools, why didn't you use your tools? That's what they're there for. Some people don't. Some people choose not to use their tools, and then they get beat up or get mugged or whatever, or they freeze because they haven't practiced enough, and they go into freeze mode. So this is not meant to be a peak experience. For most people, it is because most people come once and they don't come again. Not most, I guess, maybe half people come once and don't come again. But the other half that practice regularly experience transformational shifts. When I started practicing these games, I was also having the lows afterwards. I would also have everyone leave and feel lonely at night. I would also watch everyone else playing and feel left out. I went through all of that. I don't have that experience pretty much ever now. Sometimes I'm a little overstimulated afterwards. I'm a little anxious afterwards or agitated, but that's just because I'm getting so much that something's transforming inside of me. But again, it's not about a peak experience. The difference between most of these other events is that they don't have a community. They don't have regular practice. They don't have something that you can do. That's why we have 2 calls per week. That's why we have one event every 2 weeks, and eventually we'll have more because we want to give people a community. In martial arts, you train 2 or 3 times a week. You don't do it once a month or once every 2 months and expect your life to change. You come regularly, you practice, right? Same with a gym membership. You don't go to the gym once a month and expect to get results. You have to go regularly. It has to become a way of life. And then that emotional experience, that oxytocin, the dopamine, the serotonin, the flow chemicals, they become a regular way of life. And then we're filled up all the time. And then we naturally magnetize relationships with other people that are filled up. And then it becomes a community, it becomes a tribe rather than, again, a peak experience. Like so many people will send me pictures of, oh my God, I just ran into so and so from the games. I just ran into this person from the games. I just saw them at this event. I just saw them at a coffee shop. And That's the purpose. That's why we have a WhatsApp group, because it's about creating community. We have WhatsApp groups for all of our communities, Tulum, Playa del Carmen, Canada. We have different WhatsApp groups for people to keep them connected with each other.
This is brilliant. Because what I'm seeing also, and thank you for that answer, is over time, people go from a peak experience to a practice, from an insight and a like beautiful thing to a lived experience. And what I also see in your own world, like looking at you and where you live, you've crafted a life of co-regulation from the attunement and calibration of your nervous system and of your vibration to this channel, and this channel being open and being fed and being nourished, this sort of social, emotional, touch, talk kind of thing. Am I reading that right? Is that model accurate?
Yeah, and I mean, like, I'm new to Austin, I'm new to this area, and so I'm still creating community of people that I feel safe asking for physical touch from, asking for certain intimacy from. I have it with my roommates, I have it with other people, but I'm still creating that. So when I'm out in public, I may still feel lonely, I may still feel neglected. I'm not in a romantic relationship right now. I may still feel like my needs aren't being met, but I have the tools to get those needs met. That's the difference. Is I have the strategies, I have the tools, and I recognize that most people are worse off than me. So if I feel nervous to ask for what I want, they feel more nervous most of the time. If I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, they feel even more like they don't know what they're doing. So having that awareness is important too. It's like with conscious intimacy games, it's like being a martial artist in a room full of people that aren't martial artists. I know that if shit hits the fan, I can take care of myself. And similarly, if I was in another pandemic situation like I was during the pandemic, I know how to get my needs met, whereas other people might not.
That's so fascinating because what I'm hearing is, and this actually rarely on the podcast do I ask these, it's a yes or no question, but do you think this is a system that would for men be better than pick up in terms of skilling them up in the direction of creating what they desire, sex and intimacy wise?
Yeah, I tell myself that what we're doing is a technology that hasn't been offered yet in the world. So for my own life, the quality of my romantic relationships has exponentially changed. For people that practice regularly, the quality of their relationships is incomparable to what they were before because they know how to ask for what they want. They know how to set boundaries. The level of technology that we're working with is if I'm attracting emotionally unavailable people or avoidant people or traumatized people, etc., the games are designed to reprogram the nervous system, to reprogram my neurological wiring so that I attract different people in my life. So the potential can only be seen after usually 8 to 12 weeks is when people start to notice a big difference. And then it continues to ascend from there. But the greatest results happen in those first 3 months because there's the biggest change in the person's nervous system and how they show up in relationships, not only in romantic relationships, but in family relationships, professional relationships, social relationships. It changes all relationships.
Mm. And that's just someone practicing like 2 to 3 times per week, either online or in person, is what you're
Yeah,
saying?
and I mean, we originally used to tell people 2 to 3 times per month is like the minimum that we recommend. So it could be coming to 2 to 3 calls per month to just really be able to practice. That's like bare minimum maintenance. But yeah, even once a week is enough to really create a. It's like in recovery circles, they say go to 90 meetings in 90 days if you really want to be successful in your recovery. This is recovery work. This is spiritual recovery work.
It
So if
is.
somebody's serious about it, I recommend go to a social event every day for 90 days and let our events be one of those events that you go to. And if you're serious about becoming a more social person, which we know is a secret to pick up, it's a secret to dating, it's a secret to success in business, it's socializing. When my social needs are met, a rising tide raises all ships. So my social needs are met, all my other needs become more met as well.
That's brilliant. Um, I also love when you were talking about if another pandemic happened again, you would be equipped to give, really. There's like a bearing the weight and the responsibility of the community that becomes available to someone. Like you can be more of a contribution, and you inevitably will be if you're skilled and filled in these ways.
Yeah.
Hmm. Um, Ricky, the one question that I usually ask at the beginning, I am asking here at the end. What's your story? If you'd like to just give us your journey, and then where can people find more of you after that's done?
Yeah, I mean, if I was just to summarize my story, I mean, I was born in a family of my parents were drug dealers and drug addicts for most of my life. I knew what cocaine and handguns looked like at 7 years old. My parents had to go on, they had to take us into hiding when I was 8 years old because they owed so much money to loan sharks. And there was violence. I was sexually abused as a child. I always felt left out. I always felt not good enough. Most of my friends couldn't hang out with me because my dad was so violent and drunk and got in trouble with the law so much. I had to visit my father in jail with my brother when I was a teenager and wasn't allowed to tell anyone that we were visiting him. And I mean, I could go on about all of that, but really, it's a story of like lower class Canada, family of addicts, family of criminals, family of people on social assistance. I was homeless and jobless more times when I was underage than most people ever experienced in their life in general. I was homeless and jobless multiple times in my 20s until I finally watched the movie The Secret, read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and started recognizing that I have the agency to change my life. I don't have to be the story that I inherited from my family history. And when I change my story, my family changes too. My brother, my mother, my father all changed as a result of me changing my story. My dad unfortunately didn't change enough. He died of a heart attack while using crack cocaine in July of 2022. I was in the hospital room with him when his heart stopped. And I started Conscious Intimacy Games a month later because Johan Hari did a TED talk. It says the opposite of addiction is connection. And so I created Conscious Intimacy Games to help former addicts like myself and addicts like my family be able to get their needs for connection met so they don't need to rely on addiction and crime and all these other things that so many of us have had to give into to get what we want. And so that's the basics of my story. And I was a martial artist since I was old enough to walk. My dad taught me martial arts so I could protect myself in the dangerous neighborhoods that we lived in. And then in my 20s, I became a pro MMA fighter and eventually created a whole career out of it. And again, competed on television and world championships and so on. And when I retired from there, I went down a medicine healing path with mentors who are psychologists and shamans and coaches. And that's how I got to where I am today. So yes, how can people find me? I mean, the easiest way is Instagram. My personal Instagram is I am the higher self, all one word. And then our Conscious Intimacy Games is conscious.intimacy.games on Instagram. And then our website's just consciousintimacygames.com.
Fantastic. And is there anything that you want to like that's burning to leave people with? It's like the most important piece of you that needs to be said, or anything left unsaid?
Yeah, dream bigger. Your life and humanity depends on it.
Amazing. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise, your shares. And y'all, I highly recommend following this man and checking out Conscious Intimacy Games. Thanks for being on, Ricky.
Thank you, brother.